The room went silent. You could almost hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above, the faint whir of the air conditioner, and the collective heartbeat of 20 people who had just witnessed the unthinkable. "Say that again," she said, her voice steady but laced with fire. He smiled, the kind of smile that told you he thought he was untouchable. "I just did," replied Jonathan Harkins, CEO of Westbridge Consulting, leaning back in his leather chair as if this were nothing more than a casual conversation. In that moment, every pair of eyes in the room darted between him and her. Some employees looked horrified. Others awkwardly buried their gaze into their laptops, pretending to work. The tension in the conference room was a living thing, crawling under everyone's skin. Amina Brooks stood her ground. At 29, she had worked harder than anyone in that company to earn her position as senior analyst. Late nights, canceled weekends, coffee in place of sleep, she had done it all. But nothing had prepared her for this. 15 minutes ago, this was just another Monday morning strategy meeting. They were discussing a major client account, running through projections, slide after slide of charts and numbers, and then had made the joke. No, not a joke. A barb. A deliberate, cutting remark about her background and how she must know all about street hustle economics. It wasn't even subtle. It wasn't wrapped in some thin veneer of irony or sarcasm that he could later deny. It was blatant. Amina's first instinct had been disbelief. Maybe she had misheard him. Maybe he was trying to be funny and failed spectacularly. But then he laughed, and others, some nervously, some genuinely, followed. That was the moment something inside her shifted. Jonathan leaned forward now, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany table. "You know, Amina," he said smoothly, "in this business, you've got to be tough. I mean, I imagine you've already had to beg growing up where you did." A few people glanced toward the door, as if considering whether they should walk out. No one moved. Amina's hands were steady as she set her folder down. "You don't know where I grew up," she said. Jonathan's smile widened. "I've read your file." "Then you should know better," she replied. The moment hung heavy in the air. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone in that room who had ever been underestimated, sidelined, or diminished because of who they were. Jonathan leaned back again, smug and sure of himself. But Amina saw something else, something most of the others missed. The faint flicker of annoyance behind his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged. Not here. Not by her. It's funny how moments that change everything often start small. One sentence. One look. One choice to either swallow your pride or let it speak. That afternoon, Amina sat at her desk, the weight of the morning still pressing on her. Emails stacked up. Deadlines loomed. But her mind replayed his words over and over like a broken record. Part of her wanted to let it go. The safe move. The one that wouldn't put a target on her back. Jonathan wasn't just her boss. He was the company. His influence reached every corner of Westbridge Consulting, and anyone who crossed him usually found themselves restructured, out of a job. But the other part of her, the bigger, stronger part, was done. Done pretending. Done smiling through it. Done letting someone in power use her identity as a punchline. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do, but she knew one thing. She wouldn't let it slide. By the end of the day, the story had already begun to spread quietly, cautiously. No one said anything outright, but Amina noticed the looks. Some sympathetic, some calculating. Office politics at their finest. At 6:45 p.m., long after most people had left, her phone buzzed. It was an email from HR, subject line. Follow up on today's meeting. She clicked it open. "Hi, Amina. Jonathan mentioned there was a misunderstanding in this morning's meeting. We'd like to schedule a quick check-in tomorrow to clear things up. Please confirm your availability. Best. Rachel Kim, HR Director." A misunderstanding. She almost laughed. That was their play-downplay, deflect, and sweep it under the rug. Amina typed her reply slowly, deliberately. "Hi, Rachel. I'll be available at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I would also like to request that this meeting be documented in writing. Best. Amina Brooks." She hit send and leaned back in her chair. Her heart was pounding, but for the first time all day, she felt a sliver of control. The next morning, she walked into HR's glass-walled office. Rachel Kim was already there, sitting at the small round table, looking like she wished she were anywhere else. Jonathan was there too. Of course he was. "Amina," Jonathan said warmly, standing up as if this were a friendly chat. "Glad we could clear the air." She sat down, meeting his gaze. There's nothing to clear up. You made a comment that was inappropriate and discriminatory. Jonathan chuckled, shaking his head. Come on now. You're taking this out of context. We joke around in this office. It wasn't a joke, Amina interrupted. It was an insult. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Let's all just take a step back. No, Amina said. We're not stepping back. We're addressing it. Jonathan's smile was gone now. Careful, Amina. You don't want to make this bigger than it needs to be. But it was already bigger. Much bigger. That night, Amina sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open, the glow of the screen illuminating her determined expression. She began to write everything she remembered from the meeting, word for word, as best she could. Every detail, every reaction, every witness. By the time she was done, she had 6 pages of notes. And she wasn't just going to file them away. She reached out to an old college friend, someone who now worked as a journalist covering workplace discrimination. She didn't send the notes yet, but she asked a simple question. If someone had a story about a CEO making racist remarks in a meeting, would it matter? The reply came in minutes. It would matter a lot. The next morning, Amina woke before her alarm. Sleep had been impossible. Her mind kept replaying the meeting in vivid detail. The way Jonathan had smirked, the muffled laughter from a couple of his loyal lieutenants, the way no one else had stepped in. Her phone buzzed. It was her friend, Layla Carter, the journalist. Morning. I've been thinking about your question. If you're ready to talk, I'm ready to listen. Amina hesitated, staring at the message. This was the point of no return. Once she told Layla, the story could spiral far beyond her control. But maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. She typed back. Let's meet tonight. Somewhere quiet. At work, the atmosphere was different. Subtly, but unmistakably so. Conversations hushed when she walked by. A couple of people avoided eye contact altogether. One of them, Mark from accounting, muttered something about rocking the boat as she passed. Jonathan was in his office, door closed. The blinds were drawn, which was unusual for him. Normally, he liked everyone to see him at work, a king surveying his domain. Rachel from HR stopped by her desk. Hey, Amina, do you have a minute? Her voice was sugar-coated, but her eyes were tight with tension. Amina stood. Sure. They walked to a small conference room. Rachel closed the door. Look, she began. I know you were upset yesterday, and I understand. But Jonathan feels this has been blown out of proportion. He wants to move past it. For everyone's sake. Amina's jaw tightened. Rachel, this isn't about Jonathan's comfort. It's about what he said. It's about respect in the workplace. I get that, Rachel said quickly. But you need to think about the bigger picture. He's the CEO. If this turns into a public issue, then maybe it should, Amina said. Rachel's eyes widened slightly. I'm asking you, off the record, to let this go. Amina leaned forward. And I'm telling you off the record I'm not going to. The conversation ended there. Rachel left looking frustrated, and Amina felt the faint, thrilling burn of defiance. That night, Amina met Layla at a quiet coffee shop on the east side of town. They picked a corner booth far from the door. Layla pulled out a small notebook and clicked her pen. Okay, she said. Tell me everything. Start from the top. Amina did. She recounted the meeting, word for word, the way Jonathan had framed his comment, the laughter, her confrontation. Layla listened without interrupting, her pen scratching furiously. When Amina finished, Layla asked, And you're willing to go on record? Amina took a deep breath. Yes, but I don't want it to just be my word against his. There were witnesses. Do you think anyone will back you up? Layla asked. Amina thought of David from marketing, how he had looked uncomfortable during the meeting, and of Priya from the analytics team, who had given her a small nod afterward. Maybe, she said. I can try. Good, Layla said. Because if this is going to stick, we need corroboration. And documentation. Do you have emails? Nothing in writing. But HR contacted me. I asked for the meeting to be documented. Layla smiled faintly. Smart. The next day, Amina began quietly reaching out to colleagues she trusted. David agreed to meet her for lunch. Over salads at a small deli, she broached the subject. David, you were in the meeting Monday. You heard what Jonathan said. David shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, I heard it. And, she pressed. He sighed. Look, Amina, I think it was out of line. But Jonathan, he can ruin people. I have a mortgage, kids. I'm not asking you to go to war, she said gently. Just tell the truth if someone asks you. David looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, I can do that. Later, she spoke with Priya in the break room. Priya was quieter, more cautious. I support you, she whispered, but I can't be the first to speak. If someone else goes on record, I'll back them up. It wasn't much, but it was something. By Thursday, Layla had enough to start drafting. She called Amina. I'm going to run this by my editor, she said. If we publish, it's going to blow up. You ready for that? Amina closed her eyes. She pictured Jonathan's smirk, the way he'd leaned back in his chair like nothing she said could matter. She pictured all the times she had stayed silent in the past. I'm ready, she said. The article went live Monday morning. Headline: CEO of Westbridge Consulting accused of making racist remarks in staff meeting. It was detailed, precise, and devastating. Layla had included quotes from Amina, from David, and from an anonymous source within the company. There were also references to past allegations never proven, but whispered about of Jonathan's inappropriate humor. By 9 a.m., the company's PR team was in crisis mode. By 10 a.m., the story had been picked up by 3 other outlets. By lunch, it was trending on Twitter. Jonathan called an emergency all-hands meeting. He stood at the front of the conference room, tie loosened, his voice loud and defensive. These allegations are false, he said. This is a coordinated attempt to smear my name and this company's reputation. We will not be distracted from our work by baseless attacks. Amina sat in the third row, her expression unreadable. She noticed how his eyes never met hers. That evening, she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her swipe the screen. Amina Brooks, a deep voice asked. Yes. This is Daniel Hughes. I'm an attorney. I represent several clients in workplace discrimination cases. I read about you in the news. If you're considering legal action, I think you have a case. Amina's grip tightened on the phone. Legal action. The thought both terrified and excited her. I'll think about it, she said. Don't think too long, Hughes replied. Time matters in these situations. The pressure on Jonathan mounted quickly. Investors were concerned. Clients began asking pointed questions. An anonymous employee leaked an internal memo in which HR acknowledged inappropriate comments had been made but claimed they had been addressed internally. The leak made things worse. Much worse. On Wednesday, a group of employees, about a dozen, sent a signed letter to the board demanding an independent investigation. Amina's name was the first on the list. By Friday, the board announced that Jonathan would be taking a temporary leave of absence. Everyone knew what that meant. But Jonathan wasn't going quietly. That weekend, a smear piece appeared in a business gossip blog, painting Amina as ambitious to a fault and implying she had a history of conflicts with leadership. The quotes were anonymous, but Amina recognized the voices between the lines. She called Layla. They're coming for me. Of course they are, Layla said calmly. That means they're scared. Hold your ground. Amina did. Over the next week, she worked with attorney Hughes to file a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She kept showing up to work, even as whispers followed her through the halls. Some people avoided her. Others, quietly, thanked her for speaking up. And one morning, she found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a single note, written in careful handwriting. Thank you for saying what so many of us couldn't. No name, no signature, but it was enough to make her feel, for the first time in weeks, that maybe she wasn't alone. By Monday morning, the office felt like a different place. The air was thick with anticipation, as though everyone was waiting for a storm to hit. Some had started avoiding eye contact with Jonathan altogether. Others watched him with the fascination of people witnessing a slow-motion car crash. Amina sat at her desk, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Her inbox was flooded with messages, some supportive, others dripping with passive-aggressive advice to stay quiet for her own good. At 10:15 a.m., a company-wide email arrived. The subject line was simple: board statement regarding leadership. Dear employees, in light of recent events, the board of directors has engaged an independent law firm to conduct a thorough review of the allegations made against Jonathan Harkins. Effective immediately, Jonathan will be stepping down as CEO pending the outcome of this review. Sincerely, the Westbridge Consulting Board of Directors. The office erupted in murmurs. Amina stared at the screen, her heart pounding. It wasn't the final blow, but it was close. Jonathan wasn't in the office that day. His glass-walled corner office, usually a symbol of authority, now looked like a cage without its occupant. The blinds were open, exposing an empty desk and a single abandoned coffee cup. Rachel from HR stopped by Amina's desk. This time, there was no sugary tone. "I guess you got what you wanted," she said quietly. Amina met her gaze. "What I wanted was a workplace where people are treated with respect. This isn't about me, Rachel. It's about all of us." Rachel didn't reply. She just turned and walked away. That evening, Amina met with Attorney Hughes in his downtown office. The place smelled faintly of leather and old books. Hughes was a tall man with a calm, deliberate way of speaking, like someone who never wasted a word. "You're in a strong position," he said, flipping through a folder. "You have witnesses, documented communication with HR, and public reporting that has already put pressure on the company. If we move forward, we can not only seek damages, but also push for systemic changes in their policies." Amina nodded slowly. "I'm not doing this just for the money. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else." Hughes smiled faintly. "Then you're the right kind of client. Because this will be a fight." The next day, the investigation began. Employees were called in for interviews with the independent law firm. Some looked nervous, others defiant. David texted Amina after his session. "Told them exactly what I heard. No sugarcoating." Priya, too, confirmed she had spoken up. "I said what happened. I was scared, but I said it." Amina felt a small surge of pride. The fear was still there, but it was now shared that made it easier to carry. Jonathan, meanwhile, had taken to social media. His Twitter feed was a mixture of self-pity and veiled attacks. When you build something great, there will always be people trying to tear you down. Stay strong. Funny how truth can be twisted when someone wants your seat. The responses were brutal. Screenshots of the article flooded his mentions. Former employees began sharing their own experiences, using the hashtag #WestbridgeStories. Some were small offhand comments, subtle slights, but others were deeply disturbing. A Latino employee who claimed Jonathan had mocked his accent in a meeting. A Black intern who said she'd been passed over for a client presentation because she didn't fit the company image. A woman who recalled Jonathan joking that diversity quotas are just participation trophies. The pattern was undeniable. Within a week, the story had gone national. Morning talk shows debated it. LinkedIn was ablaze with think pieces on corporate racism. The New York Times ran a headline: "A Reckoning at Westbridge Consulting, Racism, Power, and the Fall of a CEO." The board's temporary leave began to look more and more like a permanent exile. But Jonathan wasn't finished. On a Thursday morning, just before the weekend, he sent a mass email to all employees from his personal address. "Westbridge family, I have given my blood, sweat, and tears to this company. I have always treated each of you like my own. It pains me to see lies destroy what we've built together. I urge you not to believe everything you read in the media. Yours, Jonathan Harkins." The email was meant to rally support. Instead, it backfired spectacularly. Screenshots leaked to the press within an hour. Commentators called it tone-deaf, self-serving, and proof that he still doesn't get it. Amina, meanwhile, kept her head down. She did her job. She answered questions for the investigators. She ignored the occasional glare from Jonathan's old allies. But she also noticed something new. People she barely knew stopped by her desk to say hello. Someone brought her coffee. And every so often, she'd catch someone looking at her not with pity, but with respect. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. The independent law firm released its findings. In a 42-page report, they concluded that Jonathan had made inappropriate and racially insensitive remarks to Amina Brooks in a professional setting, and that this was consistent with a broader pattern of similar behavior over the years. The board's response was swift. Effective immediately, Jonathan Harkins is terminated from his role as CEO of Westbridge Consulting. The board thanks him for his past contributions, but is committed to creating a workplace that reflects our values of respect and inclusion. The email went out at 8:30 a.m. By 9 o'clock, it was everywhere. News outlets ran with it. Employees whispered in the hallways. Jonathan's nameplate was removed from his office door before lunch. That night, Amina sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering through the window. She should have felt triumphant. But what she felt was something else, something quieter. It wasn't victory. It was relief. Relief that it was over, and that she had survived it. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Layla. You did it. Amina smiled faintly. She texted back. We did it. 2 days later, she received an email from the board. They wanted to meet with her not to reprimand her, but to ask for her input. They were drafting a new diversity and inclusion policy and wanted her perspective. As she sat in that meeting, surrounded by board members and HR executives, Amina realized something. Her voice was being heard. Not because they suddenly decided she was important, but because she had forced them to listen. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something better. Jonathan, meanwhile, vanished from the public eye. There were rumors of him trying to start a consulting firm under a different name, but no one was eager to hire him. The corporate world had moved on and his name had become shorthand for exactly what not to do. One morning, while scrolling through LinkedIn, Amina came across a post from a young black woman who had just been promoted at another company. The woman wrote, I almost didn't take this job because I was afraid I wouldn't fit in. But then I read about someone who stood up when it mattered. I decided I'd fight for my place here, just like she did. Amina didn't know her, but she smiled anyway. 2 months after Jonathan's termination, Westbridge Consulting looked and felt like a different place. The once silent office hallways now buzzed with real conversations. Team meetings weren't dominated by fear of a single person's approval. Ideas flowed more freely, and new leadership seemed determined to rebuild what had been damaged. Amina had been promoted not as some hollow gesture of appeasement, but because her track record spoke for itself. She now led the Strategic Analysis Division, overseeing a team of 12. It was a role she had worked toward for years, though she never imagined she'd reach it this way. Still, the scars were there. Sometimes she'd pass Jonathan's old office now reassigned to someone else and feel a tightness in her chest. Not regret, not guilt, but the memory of what it had taken to get here. One Thursday afternoon, she was called into a meeting with the new CEO, a woman named Evelyn Porter. Evelyn was sharp, confident, and carried herself with the quiet assurance of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Amina, Evelyn began, I wanted to thank you personally. What you did speaking up wasn't just brave. It was necessary, and it's changed this company for the better. Amina smiled, though part of her still found it strange to be praised for something that had nearly cost her career. I just told the truth. Sometimes, Evelyn said, that's the hardest thing to do. Evelyn went on to explain that Westbridge was launching a mentorship program for underrepresented employees. They wanted Amina to help design it and to be one of its public faces. It's not just about policy, Evelyn said. It's about showing people they belong here. Amina agreed without hesitation. Meanwhile, Jonathan's life had taken a very different turn. News articles about his downfall had never fully faded from search engines, making it nearly impossible for him to secure another high-profile role. Investors were wary. Former colleagues kept their distance. An industry blog eventually reported that he had taken a small consulting contract with a minor firm in another state. But his influence was gone. He was no longer a power player, just a cautionary tale whispered about in conference rooms. In the months that followed, the mentorship program took shape. Amina met with junior employees, many of whom confessed they had once feared speaking up about the subtle prejudices they faced. One afternoon, a young analyst named Marcus lingered after a group session. He was in his first year at the company, sharp and eager, but clearly carrying a weight. I read about what you did, Marcus said quietly. Before I came here, I thought maybe if you could survive it, I could too. Amina felt a lump in her throat. Marcus, you're not just going to survive here. You're going to thrive. And if anyone ever tries to make you feel like you don't belong, you tell me. He nodded, smiling faintly. By the end of the year, Westbridge's culture had shifted in ways that would have been unthinkable 12 months earlier. Hiring panels were more diverse. Annual training on bias wasn't a box-ticking exercise. Anna Maria was candid, sometimes uncomfortable, but real. The industry noticed. Westbridge, once the subject of scandal, was now invited to speak at conferences about corporate accountability and rebuilding trust. And each time Amina walked onto a stage, she carried the weight and the pride off, knowing she had been part of the change. One chilly December evening, after a long day of meetings, Amina walked home through the city. The streets were lit with holiday lights, the air thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts from a vendor's cart. She stopped for a moment at a crosswalk, watching people hurry past with shopping bags and scarves wrapped tight. Her phone buzzed. It was Layla. Just wanted you to know the piece we did together won an investigative journalism award. They mentioned your name in the speech. Amina smiled, the cold air stinging her cheeks. Congratulations, Layla. Couldn't have done it without you. Same here, Amina. Later that night, as she sat in her apartment with a cup of tea, she thought about the last year. She remembered the shock of that meeting, the way Jonathan's words had cut deep, the long nights wondering if she'd made a mistake. She remembered the friends who had stood by her, and the strangers who had reached out with messages of support. She also remembered the fear how it had almost silenced her, and how, in the end, she had decided that silence wasn't an option. Months from now, people would forget the exact details. They'd remember headlines, maybe a few quotes, but the finer points would fade. What wouldn't fade was the example. That one person, in one room, had refused to accept disrespect, and that choice had rippled outward, changing more than just her own life. The truth was, she hadn't set out to topple a CEO. She had only wanted to be treated as an equal. But sometimes, fighting for something small in your own life forces big changes in the world around you. And that, she realized, was the quiet power of courage. A year later, Amina stood at the podium of a leadership summit, speaking to a packed room of executives, HR leaders, and young professionals. Her talk wasn't about Jonathan, or even about Westbridge. It was about what she had learned. Workplace discrimination doesn't always look like a headline, she said. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's a joke that isn't funny, or a comment about where you must have come from. And when it happens, we have a choice, to let it slide, or to stand up. Standing up is hard. It's risky, but it's also how change happens. And if you take nothing else from my story, take this and wait for someone else to be the first to speak. Because they might be waiting for you. The audience rose to their feet in applause. Cameras flashed. And in that moment, Amina knew she had turned something ugly into something powerful, something that would outlast both her and the man who had once tried to reduce her to a punchline. She left the stage with her head high, her heart steady, and the unshakable knowledge that sometimes the end of one person's power is the beginning of something much greater. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.